Senator Jim Webb thinks the Democratic Party is too leftist. And he went on Fox News Sunday with BRET BAIER to talk about it. Now, before we show you the clip, obviously, don't you think it's kind of funny that whenever a Democrat or a liberal wants to bash other liberals, they run to Fox News?
You know, you mentioned the Democratic race. In the RealClearPolitics average of polls, you're about 2.3%, and well behind the front runner, Hillary Clinton. You have an uphill climb against this Clinton machine. Most political analysts will tell you that Democrats have moved resolutely to the left, and that basically Hillary Clinton has renounced Clintonism, which really was the vital core of the center, used to be in your party. In a party that seems to thrill to Bernie Sanders and maybe long for Elizabeth Warren, who are the Jim Webb Democrats?
I believe we can bring a different tone to the Democratic Party. You're right, the party has moved way far to the left. And that's not my Democratic Party in and of itself.
So who are the Jim Webb Democrats? Well, first of all, we have to know who the fuck Jim Webb is. And at this point, when he had entered the race, I was asking myself, who the fuck is Jim Webb? Now, Senator Webb was a former Secretary of the Navy. He was also an Assistant Secretary of Defense, Counsel of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and he was also in the Marines as an officer. Now, Webb, interestingly enough, he was known for resigning from the Reagan administration because he wouldn't reduce the size of the Navy. He wouldn't reduce the Navy. Interesting. So it seems like he's pretty pro-establishment as well as pro-military. Now, to his great credit, he is also against the disastrous war in the Middle East, against pretty much any disastrous war in the Middle East from his record. In fact, 7 months before the beginning of the 2003 Iraq War, Jim Webb wrote an essay for the Washington Post. Now, in it, he said, "Those who are pushing for a unilateral war in Iraq know full well that there is no exit strategy if we invade. The Iraqis are a multi-ethnic people filled with competing factions who in many cases would view the U.S. occupation as infidels invading the cradle of Islam." He was right about that. You know who was also right about Iraq and the vote? Bernie Sanders voted against the Iraq War. Just saying. So he also went after John Kerry, however, about for being against Vietnam. He was a Vietnam veteran. Apparently he was in favor of that war, but when it came to Iraq, not in favor. Okay, interesting. So he doesn't exactly seem like a liberal, which is crazy because he's in the Democratic Party running for the Democratic nomination. Interesting. Now, even though he's not a liberal, he's also, that just sort of means that he's not insane when it comes to things like war or just recently same-sex marriage or even immigration. In fact, in most of his career, Jim Webb has been a Republican. According to Raw Story, Webb crossed over from the Republican Party in 2006 to run against Virginia Republican George Allen. Huh, interesting, switching parties. Now, he flipped over as to the Democratic Party as the Republicans were getting more and more extreme, more and more insane. And of course, now that he's here, he says that actual liberals like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren aren't his Democratic Party. Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, they're not my Democratic Party. Maybe that's because Democrats haven't actually been a liberal party for a long time. And now that Warren and Sanders are trying to bring it back to what actual liberals look like, they're showing us what actual liberalism is. Well, by, of course, pushing back against a corporatist establishment that looks a lot like the way the Republicans used to look back in the 1980s, he's all kind of confused. Hey, guys, I thought we were supposed to be the corporatist here. Those assholes over in the Republican Party are a little bit too crazy for me, but I like tax cuts for corporations, just like the rest of you establishment Democrats, but I don't like those ultra-lefties, Sanders and Warren. I don't like those guys. Yes, he is actually for lowering corporate taxes. Now, just like Obama, he's like, well, let's close some loopholes and then lower the corporate tax rate. Essentially, more giveaways for corporations. Great. Now, the problem is here, with what Jim Webb has been saying, is that Warren and Sanders aren't too far left. They're actually trying to bring it back to where it used to be, the Democratic Party. It used to be far more liberal, even back in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, who was a third-way centrist, by the way. Now, I go to an interesting article that was published back in 2012 by Kevin Drum and Mother Jones. He wrote, "Since Clinton, Democrats have moved much further yet to the right in the fruitless search for compromise with a Republican Party that sees compromise itself as fundamentally evil. The obvious example is that the Democrats in 2010 literally passed the universal health insurance reform that had been proposed by the GOP opposition in the Clinton administration, only to find today's GOP vilifying it as a form of Leninist, socialist totalitarianism." Oh, how far we've come. So, Jim Webb, your Democratic Party? Yeah, I don't think so. And the polls kind of agree. He's polling at, as BRET BAIER had pointed out, 2.3%. And I don't think he's going to go much further.